Well, I apologize. I was suddenly told that the MC had left earlier, so there was nobody to kind of bridge the previous talk with this one. So this is why I'm here. But a quick introduction. Thank you to everybody here for staying for this one. This is really a very high-level impact panel together with the BGA board of advisors. So if you guys were here earlier for the fireside chat that I held with Bushu, who is from the UNDP, then you may already know a little bit more about the Blockchain for Good Alliance. So of course, just to really dive real quick into everything before I give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, my name is Glenn. I lead Global Affairs and Coordination for the Blockchain for Good Alliance. We are the flagship non-profit of Bybit, the world's second largest cryptocurrency exchange. Our primary point of existing is to really push blockchain as a tool to advance public goods as well as social impact. So of course I have with me three of our board of advisory members, Adam, James, as well as Bree, who will now give a quick introduction to themselves. Why don't we start with you, Adam, and go down the line?
Hi, my name's Adam. I'm kind of like a lot of advice, intercepting Web2 and Web3. So I kind of take it a much broader perspective. I advise impact businesses, I advise growth stage businesses, I invest occasionally in Web3 stuff. And you'll find out more, I guess, as we're speaking.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me. So James here. So actually I'm in charge of the new business at the Alibaba Cloud. And we have a so-called Singapore Innovation Alliance. We focus on the fintech, AI, ESG, and healthcare. We're dealing with the policymakers, investors, universities, as well as the listed company and unicorns. So we're trying to build an ecosystem. So that's why the concept is really aligned with the region, especially which is for the good. So we try to build the innovation and also the community together. Yeah.
I'm in a very obvious presence, I think. So I came on board of the Blockchain for Good Alliance as an ex-entrepreneur in crypto. My project was a lending protocol for climate projects as well as biodiversity projects. And I currently advise projects in renewable energy and healthcare, not just in blockchain, but in AI, mainly focused on bringing Web2 startups with existing users and revenue into technology to adopt and scale.
Right, thank you everyone. So really just to sum that up, right? So we have Adam, the founder of Grow Ventures. We have James, director of new business at Alibaba, and of course Bree, who is the founder of the Verdant Group. And all our board of advisors have different expertise. So our current board, I think, is about 15 members strong. We have different, individuals who are experts in the backgrounds where they come from. So I just want to kick off with a quick question on, from what is the exact and current state of blockchain for good in 2025. Now, blockchain for good is a topic not very commonly seen in this industry, where it's so often driven by hype narratives, right? So I just want to ask our advisors here right now, have we actually reached anywhere near a public infrastructure level, or is really blockchain just focused on the hype around crypto right now? So it's really an open floor, and we can take the question first.
Okay. Oh, no, I just...
are we going down the line like that now? Okay.
We'll go in linear order.
Okay.
This is a kind of circular question that goes around every time there's a crypto conference, every time there's a Web3. Where are we? Where's mass adoption? And all of this kind of stuff, right? Being completely honest, in the impact space, we're still very early, like C at best, if I was to give it a grade. And the reason there's some progress is largely because of larger players like global organizations, UN, different large development banks, etc., adopting some protocols and trying to kind of work with Web3 players and companies and projects to be able to make some difference and make some efficiencies. On the builder side, I still feel like a lot of builders are building, I'm going to say there's a lot, a solution looking for a problem, where they, we've been on panels and sessions where we're advising and looking at the companies that go into the incubator. Actually, so I've seen you guys before. And there's a recurring theme of sometimes it's like the technology, they find a use case technology, and they find a problem statement with a UNDP, and you just kind of end up going, yeah, we can squeeze this in a bit, but it's not really solving the real problem, or not building to solve the real problem. And I think when we can kind of navigate that scenario into being much more of a, we're solving real problems at source, and that's the direct purpose of the product. is to solve a specific problem in a specific vertical, then I think we're making real progress. Until then, it's kind of UN sponsoring stuff, and I think a lot of companies are kind of trying their best to jump on, but it'll be a reality to it.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I can add on a little bit. So first of all, I think blockchain for goods is a good initiative, and also like everybody should not only think from the productivity, from the business perspective, from the no matter CSR, sustainability, or like for the whole society goods. This is another perspective. So I think that's why the BGA is a very good initiative for everybody, no matter you are developer, investors, from another perspective. Because eventually, how you can make the world is better is make a lot of impact. And I can give you a few examples. So which we're already doing now. So for example, we have locally we work with SOSS. We have entrepreneurship program, which is more focused on social impact. And I have encouraged and also recruit some of our BGA members to become our mentors. So in the long run, the community probably will close loop and see how the impact is. On the other hand, I think Adam just now mentioned about I think BGA really work with the United Nations and trying to solve the problems not only locally but globally. Of course, it takes a long time to see the results, or sometimes it doesn't work out. But doesn't mean the initiative is not important. I think the initiative is important, meaningful, and aligned with the whole narrative. And another example, I think, for example, for the designs. Will be a very interesting thing. Although it's been mentioned a little bit, but we have not been talking about it recently. One of the reasons is my background was in fine chemicals, and I was doing my PhD in the US for the material science engineering. Although I haven't finished, I converted to master, but I do understand how difficult it is for the professors, for some of the breakthroughs to get fundings, how they can get encouraged to do the research. And if you remember, during the COVID, the RNA one actually was not encouraged. And the guy who worked on that even didn't get any funding during a long time. But it was just because of the crisis. Then she became popular, and the technology has been adopted. But I think it's not really good to let the crisis push us forward. We should work out some way to have this closed loop, to encourage. Design is one example to encourage more people to really use the blockchain to do something meaningful for the long term, for the long impact. It will take time. Yeah.
Okay, because I think both of my fellow speakers have already touched on the current state of affairs. I will maybe have a look back at the historical part of it, just to maybe give a note of optimism. I've been volunteering with environmental initiatives and had a passion for healthcare since 2010, 2012. Let's say like 5 years ago when I was in my last project with crypto, when I spoke to, what was then the beginning of my project, to ESG consultants and stuff, and I was like, blockchain is the way forward, because I have a background in oil and gas trading and supply chain. We understand that there are use cases for that technology to scale, regardless of the type of technology. But at that point in time, just compared to where it is now, where they're adopting it pretty large scale, they've gone from, but doesn't blockchain encryption take up a lot of energy, to now adopting it into all kinds of ESG solutions. We already know that growth is possible. So while it has taken 5 years for the technology to now be accepted by probably the most staunchest of like ESG consultants, sustainability experts, I think it provides a very good, clear idea of the trajectory of where we can go. I think that's maybe much more rooted in tried and true, that we have actually gotten it adopted. I think how it will be adopted is the question. I think a lot of people still don't yet understand what it solves, for blockchain especially, and we need some legitimate use cases that will stand out from amongst the noise of crypto to really go for it. And at the end of the day, because of what I focus on, I really believe that the reason why Web2 coming to Web3 works so well is because they already have users, you're already solving a pain point. The technology helps you scale that part. And it's like when you use the internet, you're not going to think about internet protocol you're using. You're not going to care if it's a Lana chain or PBS or whatever. So that's primarily it. If you solve a problem that's painful enough, whatever technology you use will get adopted regardless. So So I think that sort of like gives you a better idea of will it get more adopted. I think definitely. I think it's a question of skill and people like BGA who are actually helping with it. And the fact that Bybit is behind BGA is pretty bullish in my opinion.
Thank you for the optimism and thank you for the answers to all my advisors here. And it's very true because I always like to say that the Blockchain for Good Alliance is a very unique standing point in the industry. Of course, being backed and founded by Bybit and of course pushing, the whole non-profit aspect of blockchain for social public impact. So that's always very interesting. So our board of advisors regularly give us, different forms of expertise and support in the different initiatives that we actually have. So we have experiences together in judging projects within BGA. We have our own, incubation program. We have the ongoing SDG Blockchain Accelerator, which forms one of our major joint fund collaborations with the Verdant Nations Development Program right now. So together with the advisors here on stage, we have often engaged their support to help to grade these different projects. But of course, being such a global level also means that different problems and different projects around the world actually get paired with each other. So one example is during the accelerator that we're having right now, we see projects from one region of the world, being bridged over to projects that are in another part of the world. So it's also an interesting question to dive into that when it comes to these blockchain for good type projects, they're actually being developed in the more highly developed areas and trying to bridge them to less developed countries. What do you guys think are the obstacles that projects can actually face? Okay.
I think there's two different things that you're conflating, right? One which is like, should the developed nations be the ones who are colonizing these countries with their solutions?
There's a blunt way to put it, but yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty blunt, as you know. But I mean, that's how it can be seen. I think it really depends on the parties that are it. It is the unfortunate truth that when we look at, let's say, carbon footprint, the top 1% of the world produces 99% of the carbon emissions, right? Do we then expect the 99% of us to like, oh, let's not put straws in turtles' noses, versus the people burning carbon emissions on the private jet? So that's always the argument, and I think there is a worthy consideration to engage stakeholders in this approach. I don't think there is a right answer. I think primarily because Southeast Asia, especially in Singapore, Singapore is such a good hub for transparency. Using it for companies to enter Southeast Asia is arguably saying like, oh, we're like this first world country that is coming to these less developed countries to implement these solutions. But it also provides a safety net. We have more resources. So I think that's kind of how it's
That's a nice way to put it, safety net.
I think I just want to add on a little bit for the BGS initiative, especially to some of the small things we experienced during the been judging with the UNDP kind of accelerator program. I think actually I can share a few interesting points. I think the judging actually with Adam is very interesting. For all the UN, I just realized actually they have a local representative office, an officer actually facing a real problem. So probably we don't think it's a problem because we live in Singapore, you don't think it's a problem, but if you consider this all over the world, they have a lot of problems you didn't imagine that before. And the UN officer really brought up create the problem statement together with the matching facilitated by the BGA, especially GLAM. So some of the startups, some of the service provider will jump in and see how the existing technology or some of the fine-tuned technology help them immediately. And it's just not like the traditional just a hackathon. It's a real problem. And also, and some of the initial funding, it was UN is trying to set up by themselves. It's just like they need a little bit of support later on. So BGA also jump in. They have to some joint fund or joint grants to support them in this phase 2. And eventually, okay, so they will need to find a way to figure out on their own. So I think this is a very interesting approach because when we do a hackathon previously is also like just we create some fake problem statement and people jump, come in and ran the first prize, second prize. But later we also move to what is the client's problem statement and how the people can really solve the problem statement. With BG, I think it's brought to the next level. It's not a really it's a problem locally or with a business background. It's globally with some of the real problem, and it has kind of UN officers qualified the problem statement. I think it's make more sense for the startup, for the developer, for some of the service providers to work on that particular problem segments. It can solve some real problems. And the second part, which I mentioned earlier, is like VG also have a lot of joint grants together to support them. So I'm not saying that it is the best way, but at least this is one of the very good example which I saw right now. I think, as I said earlier on, blockchain for goods or CSR, sometimes you need to take a while to see the results. So doesn't mean we should not start it right now. Yeah.
Thank you, James. Actually, I was going to echo a little bit of what you said. It's an honor, actually, and privilege to be sitting on these, judging the incubators. Some of you guys are sitting here today because it really opens your eyes as to who is doing what and the way that the support mechanisms are starting to come into place to help build ecosystems that can function on their own. And ultimately, that's what's going to be success, is when it's not just a CSR thing, but actually a business thing. And it's the old adage of the problem with social enterprise is there's too much social, not enough enterprise. And I think that projects like this and initiatives like the accelerator, the SDG accelerator, are all kind of small building blocks in helping to kind of shift the mentality as well a bit, away from we're not just in charity, but we're actually doing business that has an impact, and that's really when we're going to get some results. But in terms of having had the overall picture, I have maybe for some of the people in the room as well, some things that I kind of have seen. I could write down a whole thesis on this because I sit on a lot of panels and I used to work in VC and all this stuff, so I assess a lot of different things. And I would break it down into three main areas, right? One is the difference between ESG, Web 2, and Web 3. They're all very different spaces, but they all have commonalities. But you can port some parts of it over and you can't port other parts of it over. And I think one of the biggest challenges that there is in the space, especially impact, is the desire to kind of port everything across into one. So, you're doing great work with Web 2 and Web 3. I'm also a big, passionate believer in understanding that Web 2 companies can make a huge impact in Web 3, partly because they've got the existing audience, they've solved the problem, but also partly because Web 2 companies try to solve a direct problem because their business depends on it. And they try to make steps in solving the problem before they go to market. So, traditionally the crypto world has always been, the builder world has always been, have an idea, write a white paper, build some hype around it, and then try and raise money before you've even started doing anything. And I think it's one of the things that we saw in, the blockers, as you say, in some of the projects was, we want to do something very, very ambitious in an African country or in an undeveloped country. We're going to work with this government, we're going to work with this government, and when you ask the question, okay, have you spoken to the government yet? Like, are they interested in blockchain adoption? We will. So it's that kind of very kind of Web3 approach that just needs to take a step back a little bit from and be able to know that if you want to do something, it's going to take a long time to work with the government, to work with even UN agencies. You're talking about 9, 12, 15 months to get real progress, right? And that is a little bit counterintuitive to the Web3 attitude and mentality. So I think if you start thinking about these things in isolation and what the commonalities are, then you'll be able to find how to remove the blocks. And I think that's honestly the most important thing that I see in all of the sessions that we go to is there's bits of ESG that really work really, really well. There's bits of Web 2 that really work really, really well. And there's bits of Web 3 that really work really, really well. But you can't take the whole thing across as a whole. You have to pick the important parts that will drive your narrative forward. And then you can remove the roadblocks one by one by one. It's not a short-term game. Impact, in general, is not a short-term game. It's a long-term game. And so the Web3 impact industry is going to have to learn a little bit to shift its patience, I guess, into more of a long-term approach. And then I think you'll start to see, I was going to say fast progress, but it won't be fast progress, but you'll start to see progress that becomes sustainable and meaningful.
Absolutely, and that's also one of the reasons why when we talk about BGA, it's defined as a collaborative, long-term, non-profit initiative, so I think that makes perfect sense. And now I want to dive a bit more into individual questions for each of our advisors. So I'll go down the line one by one, of course, and I'll start with Adam, right, since you're right next to me. So Adam, if you don't mind answering another question again, I'm going to ask you this one. So you and I have known each other for quite a while in the space itself. Even before I joined the BG, I've already known you in the space, and you're a very connected professional. So be in the Web2 industry or the Web3 industry, and being from VC background, family office background, you have helped many projects with their fundraising as well. So one very interesting question to ask you is, what's the most major gap that's really preventing founders in this blockchain for good space from, first of all, getting VC attention compared to the more mainstream projects that are driven by hype? What's the gap that's here?
Okay, well, I touched upon it a little bit in the previous thing, but the Web2 VC world and the Web3 world in general are very, very, very different. So again, Web2 companies generally try and solve a problem before they go to raise money, or they try and have a roadmap in place and build an MVP before they try and raise money. So I've seen over the last 12 to 15 months, there's a lot more Web3 builders going to market with a product rather than going to market with a white paper, and that is a real progress, and it will help, because the VC mentality is very, very different. The VC mentality is build something to solve a problem. It's also around what is the 3 to 5 year horizon for your business, not what is the TGE and how are we going to make money and return very, very quickly. We're looking at how do you build a sustainable business. So tokenomics, something that VCs, Web2 VCs are becoming very allergic to. I advise a whole bunch of companies that say don't go tokenomic forward, build a product that works, that has a sustainable business angle, and then tokenomics will come into it when your community is big enough and demanding. But especially in the impact space, if you're in the impact space, a VC investor in the Web2 space, or who's more familiar with the Web2 space, or paying fiat in exchange for equity, is more likely to want to know the value of his investment. And I think if you do tokenomics forward in the impact space, whatever the impact that you're measuring can disappear depending on the pervading mood of the industry, and whether whales have decided that your project is going to succeed or fail. So I think primarily I think of it like that. Right? So Web3 investors are going to have to start to learn to understand the concept of patient capital. So the concept of patient capital is a very ESG and family office driven thing where you make an investment, but you're not expecting anything for 5 to 7 years, right? Minimum, because you're looking at the two things. One is the long-term impact of what your investment is doing, and then secondary is the actual financial returns on what you're doing. And I think the similarities between, as I touched on in the previous session, it's just a massive monologue now from me. The ESG space was also something that's quite similar to the Web3 space in the sense that 5 years ago it was very trendy, but people were investing in it because it was trendy, because they were told this is something you need to invest in, otherwise you're not a good person. Your family office doesn't have a complete portfolio if you're not doing good. And then geopolitics happened over the last 2 to 3 years, and suddenly it became okay to not invest in green energy and clean things. It became okay that oil and gas was fine again. But what has happened is then ESG projects, and as we're seeing Web3 projects, have to think about the sustainability of the project and the long-term aims of the project, right? And that shift in mentality is something that is driving a bit of a change, right? So I think VCs will start to look at Web3 companies more because they're starting to think about what are we doing in 5 years, not what are we doing in 12 months. And once that conversation gets more and more mature and more grown up, and the companies that go through the incubator, you can see I was listening to some of your pitches earlier, you're thinking about your communities over a period of years, not over a period of months. And I think that's the most important thing, that's the most important gap that needs to be closed.
100%. Okay, pass the mic over to Bree. Since we're on this topic and we're talking about the entrepreneurial lens, I'm going to shoot the next question to BreeAnne. So, Bree, you're a founder who really is in that blockchain for impact space. You're experiencing climate tech, oil, and so definitely you would have seen firsthand, right, how difficult it can actually be to scale an idea from an ambitious idea to real impact in the world. So, really reflecting on your own entrepreneurial journey, what do you think is the most relevant, advice for founders entering the space today, especially in blockchain for good lens, compared to say a few years ago?
It's a really good question following his answer.
Yeah.
So there's like this battle right now, I guess, between like investor and startup founder. Because
I love
think
this battle.
it's a face-off. So I think what primarily I wanted to just follow up on what Adam said. I think what was interesting was like pointing out now the trajectory of how Web 2 and Web 3 works, right? At the intersection of investment. So when I had my startup, it was very much a real project. We had multiple tranches of that business to cater to both the Web 2 side with very traditional businesses who needed fiat, who operated in the real world, versus like all the other crypto stuff, our two-token model, our tokenomics, NFTs, and all that stuff. So what was interesting was at all of our pitches, you would draw both types of investors, right? You would have your Web 2 investors who are very keen, of course, for carbon credits, for example, because it's trendy to get in at a retail level, which is still not available at a retail level. And you also had Web3 investors who were all hyped up about, oh yeah, green tokens and new commodities coming on chain. And this was before when RWA was a new in actually the beginning of like DeFi summer essentially. So that is still there, like that tension between the returns that are expected in Web3 and the returns that are expected in Web2. And what was interesting to me and still is interesting now, and I think a lot of companies in all of these spaces, not just Impact, but particularly in Impact, struggle with is how do you translate the value of your token to real value, right? In terms of translating the value of each unit of your token into your equity value. And that's what a lot of the Web2 investors asked, because we had family offices coming, they wanted to get a piece of the carbon credit pie, they were excited about blockchain, but they were like, well, if we invest in token, how much does that mean for us in equity? How much say do we have? And that is, I think, the kind of knowledge that unfortunately you would want an easy answer to, but I'm afraid that in my understanding of the entrepreneurial journey is something that is not a fixed formula, and you would have to figure out depending on your stakeholders. And I think this is where, for me, a lot of the Web 2 and Web 3 stuff intersected mostly was the governance part. What kind of stakeholders are you having in your business? What kind of narrative are you giving to each of them? How much weight should they have in your business? And in understanding that as an entrepreneur has been one of the most challenging but also exciting things. And that exposes you to all the functions of the business and all the different agendas of different stakeholders. And I think learning how to navigate that is probably one of the most critical skills in straddling any kind of real world and tech project, but especially in ESG. So I think that's probably the hardest thing, navigating all your stakeholders' needs.
Because there are, three very distinctive types of stakeholders for ESG, for Web 2 and for Web 3, and they all have different metrics they want to measure. They'll have different ways they want to value. Even in Web 2 VC investing, there's 5 ways you can value a business and value the equity stake in a business. So in the way Web 3 is simpler, right? It's a simpler equation, but it doesn't translate directly. And then in ESG, it's just such a different conversation because you have different stakeholders, different agendas as to what the purpose of them being in the space is. Some families are really just about the impact. Some families are, no, I still want 10-15% year-on-year returns. So they're in carbon credits because it's the current trend is in the carbon credit space, and actually the current trend in blockchain is also to drive carbon credit exchanges, and that's where the money is. But it's really difficult to have that conversation. That's where all these gaps are. So if somebody who comes traditionally from the investment side, I have to have my own startups as well, and someone from the startup space, we see the same problem, we just disagree on the solution.
So you see how holistic I would say the whole panel is, right? So the perspectives from the entrepreneurs, the founders, the investor lens, and I'm going to jump in with another angle for James as well from an MNC lens, because James, you're a director of new business for the Alibaba Group, right? So I want to ask you, you've been following innovation trends very closely in your role at Alibaba. So from this MNC standpoint, how do you actually see larger companies in the world today really engaging with blockchain for good type solutions and projects, and what role do you think the MNCs can play in advocating this outside of just profit?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, it's a very big one. It's hard to answer. I think maybe I break down to three. So first of all is how the MNC want to work with new technology in general. So one of the answers is that's why we have the so-called Singapore Innovation Alliance, because eventually we want to work with all the developers, innovators, because all the MNC cannot do everything, right? So no matter from what perspective. So this is one very general. The second part is if we look at blockchain itself, of course, different country, different regulation. So our approach probably through no matter investment or from the community perspective. I think that's why I think it is good for us to work with like BGA, right? Because it's also community things. The last but not least, I think it is about all for goods. That's I think this is even harder to answer because in general, of course, we also need to do the CSR and related. We also have the ESG direction, but in the end, we still need to answer for our P&L, right? So my quick answer for that is, I think that's why I was mentioned about earlier. I think this community is important, and BG is one of the examples. And I'm also calling for all no matter it's a developer or the startup in the Web3. I think one thing we notice the trend is like the Web2 and Web3 is now already emerging together, especially from last year. You can see the trends closely. And also, I noticed previously, for the Web3 or some of the new technology, they tend to discuss within themselves. But if you want success, you need to create boundary. You need to break the boundary. You need to really talk to the narrative which can impact the whole society, that you can have the bigger impact, a bigger community, more investors. So I think my personal opinion is, by the way, my background is I used to work for the semiconductor. I used to do my PhD, although converted to master. I ran my own startup AF for marketing. So I was trying to tell from the different perspective. It's like instead of you just focus on your own domain, you need to really break to different domain. So BGA is doing one of the things probably didn't aware is from the narrative, which track you're talking about. Are you talking about track 2? Or are you talking about track 1.5? Are you talking about track 1? So eventually, the narrative need to work for whichever track. So then people will think, that's something that's really meaningful. Your project or the problem statement you work on really interesting. Then you're going to success. So I think BGA already creating some initiative for that, because you will definitely track 1 things, right? If you can participate, become a track 1.5. And of course, we need to have more this kind of domain-focused track 2 discussion. And from that perspective, of course, Alibaba Cloud or our Singapore Innovation Accelerator can play a role of a catalyst as well. So we can bring you more clients, channels, and stage like this for you to talk with, no matter it's track 2 to track 1.5 or track 1, provided this is really meaningful solutions or a good angle. So I think that is how I view it. Then eventually they will go back to something like people, even like tradition, TradFi or Web2 can understand. Then you're probably going to have a big success. Yeah.
Thank you. So I was just signaled to have to end this panel, unfortunately. But just one really quick wrap up, one final question just to wrap this up well. In a couple of sentences, what messages would each of you give for the next generation of innovators who actually want to enter into this blockchain for good space? Just really quick.
Find people around you who support and believe in you.
Well, that's very important.
Like BGA.
That's very important.
Oh, sorry. I think I think need to really understand the real world. So one of the shortcuts, join the accelerator program. Here is the common statement from UN.
Is he being paid extra for it?
No.
Okay. So two very simple things. Design for the last mile, because I think a lot of the technology already exists. It's really good. But actually, when you're doing impact, whether it's climate or whether it's healthcare or whether it's a lot of financial kind of base of the pyramid financial things in developing world, the last mile is the hardest, the off ramp and the on ramp, because you're dealing with people that don't have the access, the education, the technology, and it's not as easy as going, well, they have a mobile, so they can be paid or whatever. It's just design it for the last mile and make it as easy as possible. And then second of all, related to that, just know your market. I think akin to one of your first comments about colonialization of technology, a company from London solving a problem for a company in Burkina Faso. On the surface, the technology great, but the reality of how that adoption happens and drives is really going to be a big challenge. So spend time understanding who you're actually solving the problem for, and I think you'll get much further down the road, much quicker.
Thank you everyone for your answers. So really just to sum up, it's really planning ahead for the last mile and of course surrounding yourselves with the right people, the right initiatives that can actually help your project actually grow. So that comes to the end of this panel. Thank you to all the audiences today, as well as thank you to the advisors from the Blockchain for Good Alliance. So yeah, thank you so much guys. Let's do a quick vote before we end the session.